Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. Andy Zenk is my name. I'm a consultant with AgCountry Farm Credit Services and in our succession and retirement planning department. And what we're going to talk about today, a little bit with the time we have, we're going to touch on a lot of different things, giving some information, but more so just the breadth of the services and the things to think about in this area. So what we do, our department, and I'm going to share a little bit about that, but what we do is we build plans specific, unique to each individual producer. But each of these plans have their own specific pieces, right? Pieces to the puzzle, think. So we cover things in the areas of estate planning, the importance of having a plan, having an updated plan, farm succession and retirement planning, farm transition planning, bringing in that next generation. Entity planning, business entity, formal entities such as partnerships, corporations, LLCs, those types of things. Family meetings, the importance of communication, bringing in the family, those involved in the operation, and oftentimes those not involved, to share what that plan is. Make sure that that plan is communicated so that it is something that's aware and understood before something happens. And then that catch all that other planning. And I can't stress enough, we're very unique in our approach and building a plan specific to each operation. So who we are, we're fee-based consulting with AgCountry. We have our own department. It's made up of three consultants. Russ Tweeten is our VP. He's out of the Fargo office. Bobby Sondrio, she's serves our northern region out of Grand Forks. And then myself, I'm from West Central Minnesota, based out of Morris. And I serve our southern regions of AgCountry. And what we do, we're a team approach, right? This is a very expansive type of planning. It is something that we need to make sure fits not only multiple pieces of the plan, but multiple pieces of your business operation, right? From a legal standpoint, from a tax standpoint, from a credit or lending standpoint, insurance, all those pieces, we work with your existing professionals. We have to make sure that they all fit together. So think of that consulting role oftentimes as the coordinator or the quarterback of the plan. So our discussion today, it revolves around building a sound plan for your operation. And again, we're going to touch on a lot of things as much as we can here, but we're going to touch on some ideas in business planning. We're going to look at some things with transition and retirement planning, estate planning, a key thing, very important. Not only to have a plan, but make sure it's updated. And then we'll open it up for any questions if there's some time. So with business planning, one of the things we think about is strategic planning. And there's some statements up here. What are your goals, right? What do you want to accomplish? It's so easy to get into that routine, that cyclical thing. What are we doing next year? What are we doing now? How's it going to affect now, right? And that's important, of course. But what are our short-term goals? What are our long-term goals? And what are we doing today to achieve those goals, right? That's particularly interesting and concerning when we're looking at this transition or this succession piece. If we have a plan to retire or to transition that operation in the coming years, what we do today from a tax standpoint, from a debt load standpoint, from all sorts of different things, that's going to impact tomorrow, right? And again, it's so important to look out broader and to see, okay, and what I'm doing today, is that going to benefit or hinder if I want to bring in that next generation? Or tax planning and retiring, right? We want to make sure we have a plan that fits so that when that day does come, we're not just starting, right? That's a really difficult place to be. Oftentimes it helps to have a written business plan to accomplish this. So the importance of strategic planning and looking outward is what we want to reflect here. With business planning, business entities are something I want to touch on too. So business entities, the question's asked, should I be a corporation or should I be an LLC? Should I be this? Should I be that? Great questions. The answer is it depends, right? Not a good answer, but it's an answer that we need to look at closer, right? It's not a absolute yes or no. It depends on what's gained and what's lost, right? It depends on the situation. It's also very important, I want to make sure it's understood here today too. It's so important to have that team approach when we look at business entity planning. Business entity planning, if we strictly look from a legal standpoint, say I want to be an LLC or a corporation because it offers asset protection, and that may be the case. But if we look at it solely from that case and we don't involve the tax professional, we don't look at it from a tax side, right? And all of a sudden we're in a corporation, we tell our tax professional, well, I did this. What does that mean from a tax standpoint, right? It's going to have a major effect. So the example there alludes to the point that we need to look at it from a broader standpoint, and that's what we help with. But the key is we look at tax issues, we look at what is gained, what is lost, and what can we expect going forward. Now, anytime we have an entity or really any co-ownership situation, an absolute essential element is what's called a buy-sell agreement. Buy-sell agreement is a written agreement between the owners and their spouses, ideally, in a co-ownership situation that proactively makes a decision on what happens in the event of these, what we call triggering events, or 5 Ds. So what happens if there's a death? What happens if there's a dissolution, a departure, a divorce, or a disability? These 5 triggering events, we answer 3 questions. Number 1, who can be an owner? Number 2, how do we value that business interest, right? And number 3, what are the buyout terms? So those 3 questions answered for each of those scenarios. We do that proactively. We do that when we start the business, and then we make sure it continues to meet our needs, right? If we have a business entity that's 30 years old, you probably have a buy-sell agreement in the original operating agreement or shareholder agreement, whatever that is. But is that 30-year-old agreement going to fit your buy-sell needs for today? Of course, that answer is likely no, right? So making sure this is an essential piece to your operation is key. With retirement planning, again, we can talk all day on each one of these topics, so just touching on a few things here. But a few things we look at there is when retiring, what's our profitability? What's our level of debt, right? Again, that goes back to a few slides ago. What are we doing today? If we want to retire in 5 years, 10 years, is that going to be a positive or a hindrance, right? So essential piece to that. Then we look at some ideas. What are our sources of income? If we're transitioning our operation, we're changing our operation, where's that income replacement coming from? Is it land rent? Is there CRP? Have we sold it on a contract for deed to the next generation? How about machinery, grain handling, buildings, those types of things? Each one of those line items has that watch the installment sale, and that gets into the tax piece. When we sell depreciated assets such as equipment, building sites, those types of things, when we sell that, be it getting cash for it, or if we sell it on an installment sale, particular to a next generation, we have to recapture the depreciation in the form of ordinary income. For example, just a quick example, if I have $1 million line of machinery or something of that nature, and I've depreciated that down to a $100,000 adjusted basis. Now we have a $900,000 gain when I sell that machinery and equipment to the next generation. If I say next generation, you buy it and you pay me over 15 years, even though I'm getting it over 15 years, all of that $900,000 gain, because it's depreciation recapture, it's due in the first year. So you're paying more tax, a lot more tax than you're getting in that payment, right? Same is true for any depreciated asset, grain handling, building. So that's why it's so important to look at that and make sure that we have that done. Now, I bet a lot of you are saying, well, I did that with my transition, or I know people have done that. And that's true. And there are other ways to accomplish the same thing, but it's so important to make sure it's done right because the values are so much more significant. The scrutiny's there with the IRS and so forth. So we just need to make sure all that fits together. How about transitioning to the next generation? Again, a whole topic for a whole day, but just to touch on some highlights, we look at a couple things here. First, we focus on the asset transfer, the actual transaction itself, right? So how do we move it? How do we move the asset? Do we sell it? Is gifting involved? Now, gifting is a great tool, but we have to be very careful on that. Particularly, gift is just like it sounds. It's something I'm giving you. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll use that as a tax planning mechanism because of that depreciation issue. So we need to have that communication, that family meeting to make it very clear, if I'm going to transition this asset, how am I going to get paid for it? Is that in the form of increased cash rents? Is it in other various pieces? Is it selling or is it a combination? So that transactional piece is critical too. So, but the other part is, how about the actual management transfer? And there's 2 parts to this. Of course, that next generation needs time and they need to be involved to learn how to manage that operation, right? obvious essential piece of it. But how about the exiting generation? They've had a lifetime, their career has been farming and managing this operation, right? So they need just as much time and just as much work to be comfortable and be able to give that control up, right? So are we ready for this? It's not an overnight thing. It takes some time. And that's what we help with. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist, right? Seems pretty obvious, but there's a lot of scenarios where no truer statement can be. So, for example, if we have a farm transition plan, and there might even be some things in writing between the senior and junior generations, but if we don't have an updated estate plan that gels with that or that pieces it together, right? That's not a problem until it's a huge problem. So we have no plan in place. All of a sudden, mom and dad pass away. Now, if we don't have an estate plan that's up to date with that transition plan, again, there's the problem, right? Or here's an example, that buy-sell agreement we were talking about. If we don't have a buy-sell agreement in place and a co-owner dies suddenly, now what happens? How do we pick up the pieces then? We have a sudden death. We have all the fear and anxiety and loss associated with that. And then we have a business to keep going, right? So how do we do that? So if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. How about estate planning? Another key element. So estate planning, we got a definition up here. It's basically a collection of documents, assets, documentation, deciding what happens with my assets when I pass away or when I become incapacitated, right? And there's lots of different things here, but here are some of the key elements. Last will and testament is a very important common one. Trusts. Trusts, when I say the word trust, it's like saying the word tractor, right? There's lots of different kinds and they do different things. So we need to look at when we have a trust, what is it and what does it do? There are revocable trusts, there's irrevocable trusts, there's trusts that are created testamentary, They're created when a person passes away, so they're embedded in a will or in a trust. So just to give you kind of a breadth of the different things. Durable power of attorney, dealing with incapacity. This is a document where you appoint a person or people to make decisions for you to act on your behalf if you're not able to. Same thing with a healthcare directive and living will, making a decision on who makes decisions for you for healthcare purposes if you're not able to. Proper titling of property, making sure that the titling jives with your estate planning, right? So one of the very common types of trust is what's called a revocable living trust. Revocable living trust, its primary purpose is to be a private administration at death and to avoid probate. Well, probate is the court involvement of transferring assets when you pass away. There's nothing wrong with it, but can be pokey and slow, and a lot of times people want to avoid that. So putting it into a revocable living trust does that. However, if we don't transfer the assets into the trust, that trust will have to go through probate before it effectively works. Thus, what's the point of doing it in the first place, right? Now, having a plan is key, but having an updated plan is just as essential, right? Especially when we have a farm transition plan in place. We call this updating the balance sheet or running it through the balance sheet, making sure that the plan we have today or the plan we have works today. A quick example with this, let's say that I have 4 kids and one of them is a farming heir, and I want my assets or my land to go to all 4 kids, give the farming heir the option to buy the land at 85% appraised value. That was my plan 10 years ago. If we run it through the balance sheet today, knowing the current debt load, knowing the current fair market value of land, and looking at that scenario, is that a viable option still? Can that farming child exercise that option? If so, great. If not, we've got to make some adjustments, right? So making sure that it's a viable, updated plan is key. How about estate taxes? Very important piece here. So federal government, the estate tax exemption or the ceiling. If your estate exceeds $12,060,000 and you pass away in 2022, that's the current exemption. Spouses can port or combine their amounts to $24,120,000. If we exceed that, the tax rate is 40%. Now, how about state? North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, those are all coupled with the federal government. So they don't have any specific state estate tax. Minnesota, however, is one of the handful of states in our country that is decoupled. We have our own state estate tax. We have a lot lower exemption in Minnesota too, right? $3 million is that exemption. Now, with the right type of assets, qualified land and small business assets, we get an additional $2 million bump. But again, it just reflects the importance of planning there. Here's the other key one. Unlike the federal government where you can combine husband and wife's exemptions, Minnesota requires some additional rules or provisions in your will or trust to bypass or disclaim in order to get both spouses exemptions. So it just reflects another need for that plan and make sure it's updated. Now, Minnesota estate tax affects non-residents if they own property in Minnesota. So it's not just the Minnesota residents. Something to be aware of there. How about gifting? Gifting ties in with the federal estate tax exemption. So you'll see there's two parts. We have our annual gifting allowance, which is $16,000 per person per year. And then if we exceed that, you have $12,060,000 to give in your lifetime before there's any gift tax ramification. But when we do go over that annual exemption, we file a gift tax return. And that gift tax return tells the government that says we made this gift, and when I pass away, it gets included in my estate. So if I make $1 million gift, for example, I file that with the federal government, IRS, and now when I pass away, that $1 million gets included in my estate for estate tax purposes. So essentially, instead of $12,060,000, I have $11,060,000. So they're combined, they're unified. Again, a lot in a little bit of time, but I sure appreciate the opportunity. I know we're running on the clock here, but if there are any questions that I can answer, I sure appreciate the opportunity to be here. This has my contact information. Again, we're a one-on-one consulting service. If you're interested in further information, give your local AgCountry office a call and we'll be able to set you up with your area's consultant. So thank you very much.